This is the CineSnob Podcast.
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 302 of the CineSnob Podcast. I am Cody Villafana, and this is weird. For the first time in 10 years, I am hosting the show because Jerrod Kingery has decided to leave us on a permanent basis. He will pop in every now and then when there's a Transformers or Ninja Turtles movie, I'm sure. But for now, it's just me, and we want to thank Jerrod for his years of service here. He did a really great job hosting, and a very natural host, whereas it's going to be a little shaky here for me as we get started. But if you're watching here, you're going to see less videos, you're going to see less production because I don't know how to do any of that. And but we're going to make our way through. So thank you again, Jerrod. Your plaque and Burger King gift certificates will be in the mail as your thank you for your service. But the show must go on, and I will be here every week leading the way, and we will be having kind of like a rotation of other hosts or co-hosts, all former members of this podcast. So joining me today are Jocelyn Durand and Kiko Martinez. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, good to be back.
I prefer celebrity guest, Cody,
Yeah.
if you don't mind editing that back in.
So you get the with
host,
Jocelyn Durand credit.
Durand. Exactly. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, I'll remember that. Kiko, it has been quite some time. We talk about it on the show a lot, where the early beginnings of this podcast featured me and Jerrod showing up to your house and you wiping the sleepies from your eyes and recording first thing in the morning.
Yeah,
in your
y'all
old
would wake me.
house.
Yeah, you would wake me up. You're my alarm clock on Sunday mornings.
There were times where the doorbell of us ringing did wake you up.
That's true. And I want to say, how far in did I get until I had to call it quits? Was it about 50 maybe?
Something like that. It really kind of changed when Jerrod moved. When Jerrod moved, we stopped doing in-person recordings. And I think up until that point, when we were doing in-person, you were still there the entire time because we recorded at your house.
That's true. So we're saying that every evolution of this show is Jerrod's fault because it happened the first time, this second time. So
exactly. Yeah. So indirectly, you leaving was his fault.
There you go.
Yeah. And Jocelyn, your tenure, do you want to blame on Jerrod any way, or?
Yeah, I mean, inadvertently, I guess it wasn't a bad thing. It was a good thing that our paths crossed. But and I am familiar with Kiko just from the movie scene around San Antonio, especially moving away to Austin. And I was from San Antonio, so I definitely was familiar with all of your work and things like that. So I was a little starstruck when I messaged Jerrod, and he invited me on the show. I was just blown away. It was really, really nice. So
yeah, and I want to thank you, Cody, to we're underneath this CineSnob umbrella, this thing that we started, or that I started back in 2005, somewhere around there. And I remember you're like a hungry young film critic that messaged me one day on Facebook and was like, hey, can I, not even, it was probably like MySpace, right? And you're like, can I help you out? And I'm like, no.
Yep.
This is my thing. I'm doing it by myself. But then, Jocelyn, you'll understand this. I think I even told you, Cody, I was like, you can come in when I have my first kid.
Yeah.
Because I knew right away that was going to change things, right? And then sure enough, I had my daughter back in 2012, and I was like, all right, I need your help. Go watch the Smurfs.
No, that should have been dad. That should have been the dad assignment. Is the Smurfs movie?
Maybe a dad with more than 2 hours of sleep, but yeah. So that's where it started, and I just want to thank you for, after all these different evolutions of the website. We're trying to get the website better than it looks right now, and we're working on that in the next couple of months. But just thank you for continuing the podcast, because that's been basically the bread and butter of this website thus far. So we'll get it back up to where it needs to be. Podcast wise, it's fine, but everything else we need to brighten it up a little bit more. But that'll happen soon.
Yeah, I'm hopeful for that, and it's been fun too to kind of like to continue with Jerrod. I don't know, in Kiko, I know that you haven't done it in a while, but I really like talking about movies versus like trying to work out a well-written review.
You know what?
For me, it's just so much easier.
I mean, I come from a journalism background. All I did was write my entire life.
Yeah.
And then when 2020 happened and the pandemic happened, there was nothing to write about anymore. It was like a break for 6 months. 6 months, it became a year. And I just realized how much of some criticism landscape was changing and how people didn't really appreciate a well-written review. I mean, you could basically get away with, writing a blurb and get your stuff wherever you wanted, right?
Yeah.
And that just kind of, I don't know, weighed on me a little bit as somebody who had been doing it for 20 years. And it was like, why am I wasting my time writing, 700 to 800 words on something that people aren't going to read? And like you said, I'd rather talk about it and, bounce ideas back and forth off each other. That's a lot more fun. And it's not saying that I'll never write a review again. I'll do it because I see so many things. But I mean, when you have 8-year-old film critics being invited to the red carpet, it kind of like
Yeah.
those like, and I'm sure you've seen it. It's like the type of like what are they called? Can't think of the word that I'm looking for, but just kind of things that are happening in the film criticism and journalism world that are changing, that just they weren't happening 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
it's kind of made me become the old man screaming from the yard kind of person. But
Screaming at the clouds.
yeah.
No, but I will say, Cody, I don't think it is easier. I think the podcast is actually much more difficult. Do y'all see that? Hear that echo?
Yeah. Echoes
I
back.
don't know why it came back, but I think it's just so much more difficult to think of things off the top of your head, especially what you were just doing, Kiko, where you're like, what is the word I'm looking for? I would literally, when I was writing reviews, spend like hours thinking of the exact word that I wanted. And here on the podcast, you really have to come up with it spontaneously. It's much more difficult.
Well,
Yeah.
Now,
The word was
go
gimmick, by the way.
okay.
Oh, you got it. Good.
Jocelyn, you do know that you can prepare for this, right?
Shut up. Yes, I'm going to write my 500-word review.
Yeah,
first,
you can
and
have
I'm
a-
going to come on here and read it with my script.
You can have a list of adjectives on the side right here.
Yeah,
Yes,
keep
absolutely.
thesaurus.com open in a tab.
No, you know what I love about this podcast is like one of my favorite things when I used to be a film critic was like the moment after you come out of a movie when you are just like so either like appalled or excited by something and going and getting a drink with a friend and just talking it out. And that's exactly what this is. And once I realized that, it made me understand it a little more as far as like how my brain operates with this type of a sort of medium, I guess you can say.
I think you've come up with a gimmick right there. We'll do that every other week and just get sloshed for one every other episode.
Guarantee there's already one like that.
I had a podcast idea once, which is like you would have a drink and like talk about like a movie or TV or something, and it was going to be called the Hollywood Buzz.
I like it.
I like it.
We'll see. Nobody take that
This is pure
idea.
vodka, so
Oh,
this
okay.
is all vodka.
Very nice.
Kidding, it's water.
Well, I thank you both of you for being here, and you guys are gonna kind of rotate and come in back and forth, and some shows it'll be all three of us, some shows it'll just be me and one of you, but we're gonna try to cover all the ground we can moving forward and keep everything going. So again, everyone who's listening or watching, I apologize for any kind of bumps in the road as we kind of get used to this, but it should be good. I'm excited to keep this going. And so I want to move us on into something real quick here, which is talking a little bit about Fantastic Fest this year. So Fantastic Fest is happening. I think it premieres, I'll have the dates. I think it's the 20th through the 28th of this month. Oh, excuse me, September 19th through 26th. I almost had it. And every year we kind of spend some time talking about it. Now, Kiko, I don't think that you have done much Fantastic Fest, but Jocelyn, you have some history with the festival, right?
Yeah, I actually used to work it.
Like, were you volunteering?
Adobe Mall. I think I made a small amount, but yeah, it was. I lived in Dobie at UT, so literally it was downstairs, and I would go and, cut tickets and hang out with like the stars that didn't want to be inside. Like I told you, it was like Rappaport. I met Danny Trejo, some other just bizarre, random people. and it's so much more preferred than South by, in my opinion. It's just so much more laid back.
It is interesting the difference between those things. Kiko, have you done much Fantastic Fest? I don't think we've ever really talked about that.
No, I think maybe at the beginning, like I've done maybe 1 or 2 years, and then South by. I totally agree with you, Jocelyn. South by is not as laid back now than I'm sure Fantastic Fest is. But back when when I first started back in the early 2000s, it was very laid back. But there wasn't none of the corporate overtaking of it. So I mean, you could get interviews with the biggest stars that showed up. Not to say that those huge stars, but you could get your hand or your pick of whoever was there because nobody else was showing up and covering the event really. So now it's completely different.
I can't
For
imagine
sure.
what it's like now.
No, it's terrible. It's
it
terrible.
would probably make me really sad if I saw where it came.
Well, and I think that's where I think Fantastic Fest is such an interesting thing. So it started in 2005, so they're coming up on almost what is that, 30 years of Fantastic Fest at this point, and or 20 years, excuse me. I don't know where that came from. Almost 20 years of Fantastic Fest, and I think the thing that I talk about this every year, but the thing I love the most about it is just sort of how self-contained it is. So if you do South by Southwest, especially now, you're kind of like bouncing back and forth between venues all across downtown. You're taking shuttles to get to Alamo. God forbid you have an interview and you have to run across to a hotel somewhere in the middle of downtown Austin. It's a pain in the ass, right? And, to some degree, Austin Film Festival is the same way. But what I like the most about Fantastic Fest is it's all located in one place. So every single screening takes place at Alamo Drafthouse, South Lamar. That's where everything's set up. It overtakes the entire theater, basically. When you're doing press, all the interview spaces are in the highball, so you just go next door and you do interviews. And it's just such an easy, smooth experience. And, last year there were just like some slight issues with ticketing. I think they may have like oversold or overbooked, but I still got into everything I wanted last year just from, kind of following the ticketing protocol. And I think the most interesting thing has been sort of the shift in the programming over the last few years. The bread and butter of the festival, I believe, is and always has been genre films. So, really going in on horror movies, sci-fi, action films, things like that, martial arts movies. And there's still plenty of that. But the programming has skewed a lot towards like putting a spotlight on like really great international films. Parasite played there, before its Oscar run, a few years ago. And I've seen some great movies there that were like international feature submissions, and kind of like some decent profile springboards for awards type movies as well. And so I'm really excited this year to go back. I'm going to be going there from Friday until Thursday, so I think I'm just missing one day. And I'll have a full report when I'm back. But just to kind of preview things, I think there's like some cool programming there that's a mix of things. So, one thing that they do is like anniversary screenings or restorations. So there's like a 10th year anniversary screening of The Babadook happening there. There's a 4K restoration of The Guest, a movie that I really love, playing there. There's also events that they do. So they like do some live podcasting stuff, but also the Found Footage Festival is doing a show there. And so, Jocelyn, I think you saw Chop and Steal, right? The documentary about the guys who were pulling pranks on like the TV stations and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, that one is awesome. That was at Fantastic Fest? Yeah.
It was at Fantastic Fest, but also the guys in it run the Found Footage Festival, which is like...
that's right. Yeah, that was in the movie.
Yeah, like weird VHS tapes that they get from like garage sales and stuff like that, and they curate it and do commentary on it, and it's really funny. And then,
especially as a news reporter, that movie was just hysterical because, like, those morning producers, like, it could totally happen. They are just, like, trying to get people in and out of that. So it was really hilarious to be from both like a movie perspective and a news reporter background, where I was just like, oh, they got you. Like, they totally got you.
Yeah, they're super funny. And then one other comedy event that they do is they do the Benson movie interruption. So for people who haven't heard of that, basically it's comedian Doug Benson, and he brings in like 3 or 4 comedians. They're usually local Austin comedians, and they sit in the front row of the theater with live microphones. and you watch
Mystery
like
Science
a bad
style.
movie and they basically just talk shit about it for the entire movie and make fun of it and stuff. And last year they did Roar, that movie that is sort of like from I think like the 80s, that was made with like untrained wild animals, and it's like tons of crew members got injured and hurt, and it's crazy. And they did a commentary over it, and it was really funny. And when you're in that festival slog where you're watching like 5-6 movies a day for 3 4 5 days, you need something to break it up. And for me, that was like the perfect thing to break it up. And this year they're doing it, but they're encouraging the people who come in to bring their own DVDs. So people are going to bring their DVDs of movies, and then they're going to pick from that, watch it fresh, and do commentary on it. So that's a super cool event.
And you're going to bring in, obviously, your home movie DVD.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, shown.
He's too young for VHS, definitely.
That is.
Oh my God,
that is not. Well, it's not quite true. I did a little VHS.
Okay.
I should bring in an episode of this podcast and.
Oh my God, that would be the best.
Yeah, and then the lineup itself. So just some movies I'm excited about. So I mentioned that there's some like high profile festival stuff. So one movie they're showing is Honora, the movie that is coming out, directed by Sean Baker, who of course did the Florida Project, a movie I think all three of us really loved. Jocelyn, am I making that up?
No, you're not. He did Tangerine too.
He did Tangerine too. Yeah. So a really interesting filmmaker. Apparently that movie is amazing and features a great performance. They're also showing a Different Man, the movie with Sebastian Stan, A24 movie that premiered at, I think it's Sundance, that looks really interesting. Like I said, there's a lot of international films that were selected, or that were like international Oscar selections that play there. So there's a movie called Cloud that's playing there that is the Japanese entrance to the Oscars for this year. So I'm excited about that. There's also a movie called Memoir of a Snail. And Memoir of a Snail is a Australian claymation movie this year. And it is the first feature film in 15 years from Kiko, the director and writer of Mary and Max.
Nice.
So he hasn't made a movie in 15 years, and a feature movie at least. So it will be really interesting to see. That's Jocelyn, have you seen that movie?
No. It sounds familiar.
Great.
Yeah.
I probably have heard you.
Philip Seymour Hoffman's one of the voices. Toni Collette is the other one. Yeah, so really, really underrated, underseen animated film. And it's funny that you brought up that one and the Florida Project, just to throw it out there. But my daughter, who's going to be 13, it's been my goal over the past year or so to show her things that'll make her cry. So I'm telling her, like, I bet I can make you cry if I show you this movie. She's like, no, you can't, Dad. And those last two, especially the Florida Project, we're just both bawling our eyes out at the end of that.
That's so funny. I have a 14-year-old niece, and that's like her favorite movie.
Really?
Now.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and in Mary, and so the thing I've heard about Memoir of a Snail is that it's rated R, and it's an adult-oriented animated movie. Mary and Max is like devastating. It's super heavy for being an animated movie, but
you don't
really
say that
great.
lightly too.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, anything that
It's
has,
gonna destroy me then.
Yeah.
It 100% will. Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've become such a baby when I became a mom. And Cody knows I have to toughen up again.
We had to, for the first couple of years, we couldn't show Jocelyn anything too sad or that involved children in it. So Kiko, I've been trying to get Jocelyn to watch Mass for since it came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a tough one. I was thinking about that, the way that we've changed over the years. And didn't you have to at the beginning of your film criticism career, didn't you not really like horror movies, and you've kind of learned to grow into that?
Yeah, I really didn't like them at all. I wouldn't even go to screenings now.
Yeah, I remember that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and over the years, I've really kind of warmed up to it. I think you and I, Kiko, I think share the same thing, which is like we can get engaged with like genre type stuff in particular context, like when you get a sci-fi movie like Moon, for example, that's like kind of like a really smart cerebral drama that's kind of wrapped up in some sci-fi stuff, or like Let the Right One In, which is like a really incredible story and movie that's told and with, like a vampire kind of thing. So that was my entrance into it. And then I think slowly but surely I started to appreciate and enjoy things a little bit more. I still have, like high standards. I still, don't love like,
Saw 8. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. Like
all that
like
torture porn stuff. Because I hear that so often from people, and they're like, I just don't like horror movies. And I always want to be like, well, there's different types. Like, you can't just categorize all scary movies as horror movies, because like you said, the Saw movies are just complete in a different category than a lot of really incredible ones. And Let the Right One In is like a perfect example of that, where it can be like a really beautiful experience. So
I agree.
You don't want to limit yourself.
Yeah. So that was kind of my entrance into understanding things a little bit more, and now I'm a little bit more open, and that's why I appreciate Fantastic Fest, because like it is very much not just like all slasher movies or torture porn or whatever. There's a lot of really nuanced horror stuff. Like last year they played and it's actually where I saw the movie. Oh, hold on. We have a comment here from Jerrod Kingberry. It says, "Hi friends, can't listen because I'm in class, but I agree with Kiko." So he can't listen, but Kiko, he's on your side for whatever we're saying. Jerrod right now crushing it in his stand-up class, I think. We can't wait to hear your latest material. So anyway,
Look at you
the movie that I
saw. Comment though, Cody. Sorry to get you off track again. Look at you bringing in the comment.
Oh yeah,
Driving
Jerrod.
This ship.
Jerrod couldn't even do that. So anyway, what I saw was When Evil Lurks. I saw at Fantastic Fest, and again, like crazy, like super well made dark horror movie. They also showed like Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes. That's not really a horror movie, but it's like a super like creative kind of thing. I think they showed One Cut of the Dead there, which is like a super interesting horror comedy kind of thing. So there's a lot of different programming there, and if you're into the horror comedies, it's there. If you're into slashers, it's there. If you're into cerebral stuff, it's there. And then also you can get a lot of international stuff, and then you also get like the secret screenings. So this year there's 5 secret screenings. There's been some secret screenings I've really liked in the past. There's been some secret screening stuff I didn't really love in recent years, but it's always, the buzz is always super interesting there with people trying to guess and figure it out. I think my best experience was they played Dolomite Is My Name as a secret screening years back before it had come out, and that was just such a fun screening to see in a theater. I don't think that movie... At that point, I don't think Netflix put that in any theaters. So seeing that on the big screen with the crowd was super fun.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Does that still give you a rush to not know what's going to be playing? Because for me, I've gotten way too cynical, and I just tell me what I'm going to watch, man. I don't want to. Yeah. I don't want these secret screens. Just tell me, and I'll decide whether or not I want to go.
So I think the only cynical part of me is... If you have to like take up a spot in your calendar, and if you want to go, you have to use up a ticket, and you can't like switch. And so if you get something that either like you don't care about, or like if you saw it at another festival, or it comes out tomorrow, so for example, like last year, we all knew it was going to be Saw 10, and Saw 10 or whatever was coming out like literally the next day. Or like 2 days later, there was a press screening the same night or something like that, and I went anyway, and it was Saw, and I was like, this sucks, but
do people ever get up and just leave?
So that happened once. So one time they played Werewolf by Night, which was a Disney Plus
30 minute,
directed by Michael Giacchino, and people left when that was announced, because again, you're saving a spot and you're playing like a TV special on it. So that's the only time I've ever seen it. Everyone else has pretty much stayed anytime. But like, like one time it was like Benedetta, that nun movie that I found to be pretty good. Saltburn was a secret screening last year. So that
what are you hoping that you sit down and they're going to announce it? Like, what do you want the
like
title to be?
Wildest Dream.
Yeah.
So I mean, so speculation. I think a good bet is the Life of Chuck. I think is going to be there. So that's the new Mike Flanagan directed Stephen King adaptation.
There's a kid from San Antonio and that's in that movie.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, Mike Flanagan's going to be at the festival, so there's a good chance if you know someone is there in some capacity, we will probably see them in some way. I'm trying to think of like anything else that would like really. One thing that we think might be there, or that I think might be there, is the Saturday Night Live movie, because it's Sony and Sony owns Alamo Drafthouse and Fantastic Fest, so you figure, you know, with that connection, you might kind of see that. I'm looking at the 2024 release schedule to see if I see anything that like sticks out as like, ooh, I wonder if they could do this.
Yeah. See, I would totally sit down and watch the Saturday night. I would steal your ticket for that. So.
Yeah.
I really want to see it too.
I imagine they'll probably do something that maybe just like played at TIFF or something like that might not be out until. I mean, like the dream is like Nosferatu, right? Like the Robert Eggers Nosferatu.
Yeah, but that's like Christmas, so that's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be a little bit early, but like that would be like the pipe dream, but I don't think that'll happen. But we'll see. So Fantastic Fest coming up over the next week, and like I said, we're gonna skip next week. We won't have a show next week because I will be there, and then when we come back, we're gonna have like a mega episode that will episode where we talk about Fantastic Fest, and then some stuff that we mentioned, that is coming out like next week and the following week. So anything else to add on Fantastic Fest, guys?
No, but if we wanted a MAGA episode, we could go watch Am I Racist? That's
we talked about that. We could also invite Jerrod back, you know, if we wanted to do that.
Poor Jerrod's not here to defend himself, Cody.
Jerrod's going to take strays for the foreseeable future. That's what he gets for leaving. All right, so to steal a Jerrod quote on that note, let's go to reviews.
Here are this week's reviews.
All right. So first up this week, we have Speak No Evil. So Speak No Evil was directed by James Watkins, and he also adapted a screenplay that was based on a Danish movie. So this movie is an American remake of a Danish movie that came out in 2022. A movie that I saw at Sundance, I think in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. I think this is going to be an interesting movie to talk about, because I think that we're going to have maybe different reactions and experiences just in terms of like how we came about the movie. And I feel like your reactions and experiences might be across the board based on like whether or not people have seen the original or not, especially when we're talking about a movie that relies on tension and also relies on like a reveal and a bit of a twist. It's kind of an interesting experience, right? So, you know, I'm coming at it from the perspective of someone who has seen the original, and then I'm watching this new one. Kiko has watched the new one first, but went back and watched the original, and then Jocelyn has seen the new one and read about the original on Wikipedia. So you know, a variety of different experiences. So, you know, the movie, which stars James McAvoy and Aisling Franciosi in the lead roles. They play a couple that has a child who is, I guess, like we would call them like mute child. And they are vacationing in Europe, and they come across and meet another couple played by James McAvoy and Mackenzie Davis. And you know,
yeah, you got that confused. James McAvoy isn't with.
It's Scoot and Mackenzie.
Right. Scoot McNairy and Mackenzie Davis. You're right. Yeah. So Scoot McNairy and Mackenzie Davis come across the other couple with James McAvoy, and they strike up a friendship, and you know, just kind of, you know, meeting and talking, and Scoot McNairy and Mackenzie Davis have a little girl that they're traveling with, and you know, after befriending them, James McAvoy and his wife invite the other couple to visit them down the line at their farm. And they take them up on the offer. And then once they get to the farm, they start to notice that things may not be exactly as they appeared. And we'll kind of leave it there to avoid spoilers. But, you know, like I said, I think our experiences might be a little bit different just based on knowledge of the source material. Because it's hard to watch a movie kind of unfold like this and then kind of know the beats and know the twist and have that information in the back of your head while you're watching it unfold. So, my experience watching the movie was not like filled with as much tension because I kind of knew where it was going. That being said, evaluating its sort of establishment of tension, I think it does a good job at sort of like hinting towards inklings of things being wrong and then like kind of pulling back a little bit and maybe thinking that things are normal and then hinting towards things are wrong and then pulling back a little bit. I think the whole thing is anchored really well by a great performance from James McAvoy, who kind of toes the line that I'm describing of sort of like being really creepy but then seeming normal really well. I think McAvoy's been doing great work for a long time. Even in movies that are not great, I think his performances are always at the very least interesting. Even I like him in the X-Men movies. Like I think he does a great job there. I liked him in Wanted, a movie that I think maybe might not hold up, but I think he does great in. So as for his wife, and I'm trying to avoid her name because I don't know how to say it exactly, but Aisling Franciosi, I think that she does a good job for her part too. The other couple, I typically like Scoot McNairy as an actor, which by the way, I don't know if either of you watched the show *Halt and Catch Fire*, but both of those,
it's great. But
it's really great. Mackenzie Davis and Scoot McNairy are both in that show, but they don't play a couple, so it's weird to see them. Your brain goes like, wait a second.
You're like, they're not supposed to be together.
Yeah, they're not supposed to be together. Yeah. And so, I think Scoot McNairy is fine in this. I think Mackenzie Davis is good. I like her performance second to McAvoy in this. But the movie kind of really plays up this sort of like themes about like masculinity and watching sort of like Scoot McNairy, especially because in a situation where, they reveal that like maybe there was something going on with their relationship between McNairy and Mackenzie Davis. And and it kind of plays up the themes of masculinity, especially watching the way that James McAvoy interacts with his wife, and then seeing him interact and act as a parent. And kind of like the parenting piece starts to get like a little bit kind of like aggressive and weird. And that's kind of when everything, starts to turn there. So the movie kind of ratchets up the tension for the first, 2 acts of the movie and up through the first 2 acts of the movie. Pretty similar to the original and to the Danish version of it. The third act is where we start to see some differences. And I feel like and maybe this is, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but for me, I think the reaction depends a lot on 1, the source material, and 2, what your preference is in terms of like the type of movie that you like.
For sure.
For me personally, I like the bleak, I like, the dark, and the original Danish version is like super dark, and the ending is different than what you get in this one. I prefer the Danish ending. I think that the third act of the American remake here is starts to feel a little bit like, to me, kind of like generic, where it kind of turns into like more of a survival movie that like like the typical kind of like final girl thing, but it turns into like final family kind of thing, right? Where the family is kind of fighting to survive once things kind of turn there, whereas the original kind of not only goes into something darker, but it goes into something darker to punctuate its themes. And the themes in the original are really played up as like, sort of like the perils of politeness and like how far someone can get pushed when they don't push back, And I think that piece of it is somewhat throughout the American remake, but not really something that kind of has that same payoff in that final act. Now, that to be said, or all that to be said, I think that, again, the third act delivers on sort of like just sort of like from a what the audience might want to see perspective. I think it does a good job on kind of delivering on that promise. I guess it's moderately satisfying for the experience, but for me, just as an experience, it was really hard to extract that original kind of knowing where it was, and it wasn't as tense for me as an experience, but I can see it there. I also think that it's well photographed. I think the cinematography looks great. And I think that, again, for a studio horror movie, You know, it's got good performances. It looks good, and it's a solid studio horror, if not an inferior, in my opinion, version to the original. So, Kiko, you have seen both, so tell us what you thought about Speak No Evil.
Yeah, so when I went into this, of course, it was a remake. I had never seen the original, like you said. So when I finished up the American version, I right away, because I liked the American version so much that I was like, hey, this is one of those ones that I don't know how it fell through the cracks for me, but I'm going to go back and watch the original one. And so I did that, and I wish I had gone the opposite way though, because as I was watching the original one, I started seeing things that plot holes or things that I would have wished that they had explained a little bit more that were explained in the new version. There was just, and there were tiny things like, like the rabbit, even like the little bunny rabbit had the reason that they turned back that one time. I won't spoil too much, but there was a big reason for that in the remake, and it was less of a thing in the original, which kind of, like, as a parent, I'm like, oh, I would have been like, no, we're going straight ahead. We're not turning around. But then in the new version, it's like, okay, there's a reason to turn around. And in the original, I would have been like, we'll buy you 100 new bunnies. We're not going to buy you, So there were little. Go ahead.
Well, and this is a thing that's sort of like the horror movie trope of like people acting really stupidly in these movies, and it's hard because as you're watching this movie, especially Scoot McNairy acts like a moron so many times throughout the movie.
Yeah, he's a very weak character. And I think that's the way that they wanted to write him, to kind of contrast with McAvoy's character. And I think that the mother was kind of, like you said, that there were the two medius roles because they were going at each other head to head, right? Mm-hmm. So as I was watching the original one, I didn't feel the tension that I felt in the remake. There was points where in the new version where I just felt very uncomfortable through the whole thing, and it was mostly coming off of James McAvoy's performance and the little things he would do when he fed her the meat, just the way that he did that, or when he took the kid on the motorcycle. There's a scene where he's like, oh, let me just take your kid on a motorcycle, and as a parent, you're like, there's no fucking way I'm gonna let somebody do that, right? And it just like your heart just like, even if it was like 30 seconds, right? And so in the new one, there's things that are, I mean, the old one, there's things like that that are missing.
It was a Vespa. It was not a motorcycle.
Sorry, a Vespa. Okay, that's right. That's a little bit better.
It's a scooter.
so in the original one, I think that was the bottom line for me. And in the new one, it made me feel very uncomfortable, very on edge. In the original one, I didn't feel as on edge about the things that the bad dad was doing. And then I'll talk to you about the. And again, I hate comparing. Cody, you know how it is. It's kind of like, I want this film to stand on its own, right, but it's really hard not to compare.
It's 2 years later.
Yeah,
it's exactly. 2 years later.
But that happens. I mean, that happened with Let the Right One In. Like,
right.
They make the international one or the foreign one. They want to make the American version.
Right, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, it worked with Let the Right One In. It didn't work with something like Force Majeure, right? So when you look at things like that, it just depends. Luckily for this one, I think both of them are strong films. Let's talk about the third act real quick. Completely different, like Cody said. One's very bleak. I love bleak like Cody. One's very, and I would even push it to farther in saying that it's just an American. This is an American movie. Yeah. There is absolutely no way you get away with showing what they showed in the remake. It's just not going to happen. So like you said, it's a kind of break into the house type of thing where you're running for your life and trying to hide in closets and things like that. I was fine with both. The bleak ending in the original film was fine. It was very menacing. It was very hard hitting, and I thought it was very, very well done. But I thought the remake was fine. I really liked the comeuppance that certain characters get. Just in terms of comparing the two, they end on very different notes in terms of who comes out on top. So it just depends on the kind of movie that you like and the kind of ending that you want to see, because some people hate seeing certain endings. Cody, like I always say, people hate the very vague ending. Well, people really hate like if a bad guy wins or a good guy wins, right? They want to see something specific. So if you're going into that like thinking one way for the original and you're coming out completely different, then you'll probably feel a lot better about the remake and how that one ends as an American movie, because it's far and away the, I don't want to say safest because it's still very graphic, but it's an easier pill to swallow for American audiences, to, I guess is what I'm saying. So
Sure.
both very solid films. I actually would, if somebody was telling me to pick one, I would pick the remake by a hair. So
Interesting. Jocelyn, how about you? What are your thoughts on the new one, since you did not watch the old one?
Well, first of all, I'm extremely jealous that you got to see the original without knowing anything about it. Like, that must have been incredible. And knowing, like, the way that the story plays out from reading about it, I mean, I just can't imagine. And I'm very glad, speaking about being sensitive to, you know, a lot of things now, that I knew about it. And I may go back and watch it. Because I really did love this version of it. I did like the remake a lot. I think McAvoy is just like McAvoying. He's like chef's kiss. He's amazing.
It's his best role. I think it's his best role.
He was giving me like Robert Mitchum, Night of the Hunter, scary subtlety. Like, you know, like this person is pretending to be nice and you know he's not. And it was so well done. I couldn't stop thinking of that, like that old type of horror, like Night of the Hunter, like just a bad person. So that was really fun to watch. And the first two acts are rather long. I mean, they do a lot of good suspenseful things, like Kiko was mentioning, like the meat thing, like the motorcycle. They do a good job of planting those seeds along the way, but it does stretch on a little too long for me. I wish they had tightened that up. Because when you do get to the third act, it really gets fun. And that's when I started being like, this is Straw Dogs. Like, this is a Peck and Paw movie all of a sudden. I don't know if Cody has seen Straw Dogs. And then reading, I'm like, man, I haven't seen that movie in so long. It immediately made me want to watch that movie. And reading about it again and learning, like hearing like Dustin Hoffman is this, you know, academic nerd. It's literally in the British countryside. It's exactly the same. It must have been inspired by it. But then it made me wish that they had done more with the dad in this movie, to be more like as far as like a transformation into a like real badass at the end. I like knowing that, yes, he is very like, you just want to kill him sometimes. He's so dumb. But it would have been so good if there had been like that transformation to the end of him, like just unlocking that, like in Straw Dogs, like tapping into the insane whatever was buried down beneath his, like, you know, inferiority. If that had come out, and it didn't, it was still, you know, the female character kind of, I won't give too much away, but having to do most of the work.
There basically. You go again. Hating women's empowerment.
No, it was great. I loved her. She did a great job. I just think
you wish it was the man. We get it.
It would have made more sense to the story if, like, that was what that it had. It would have been a journey. It would have been more of a journey for him and his character.
I think so too. I think I was waiting for that to happen, and then when it didn't, I was like, oh, that was kind of a letdown. But
like,
then,
you wanted it to happen. He needs
you wanted it to happen, but maybe that's why they didn't do it, because they thought, well, maybe it's too easy of a
go
switch
watch
right
Straw
there.
Dogs if you want that, you know.
Yeah, let's keep her as a strong one, and then that's an interesting thing that we both saw, and that I'm sure Cody did too.
Yeah,
but
and I know that the original has a much more sort of tidy ending,
very
even
tidy.
Though it's very sad and terrible, but you know, horrible. I feel like this one got real messy and bogged down in all the kind of bullshit. So it was still great. I still loved it. Had a great time. There was just a couple things that I was just like, man, I wish they had done this a little differently.
Yeah, you brought up Straw Dogs. As I was watching it, it reminded me of another film that I saw back when I first started film critiquing, and it was called. It's a French film called With a Friend Like Harry. You should take a look at that one. It's set on a French countryside. But it's about two people that knew each other, like friends from high school, and they just happened to meet in a public bathroom, like many years later. And he's like, I remember you from high school. And he's like, oh, really? Yeah, we're in the same, you know, English class or whatever. I even remember a poem that you wrote. And he recites the whole poem. And then so they end up back at their house with the family and everything. weird things start happening between those two. But that tension really boiled over the same way. So if anybody's listening and hasn't seen that film, it's called With a Friend Like Harry. I think it was a 2000 film, French 2000 film. But
I'm definitely going back.
It was 2000, and Kiko, you hooked Jocelyn from when you said it's a French movie.
You don't know this. My husband's French, so.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, check it out.
But I've always also really like the French film was Japanese and French were like my favorites.
Yeah, you'll definitely like this one then. It's with Sergi Lopez. He was a bad guy in Pan's Labyrinth, so he plays the hairy guy. So
but yeah, so I don't know. It was just like it wasn't bad. I mean, no one's gonna be upset leaving that theater. It was a lot of fun.
It was fun. I agree.
Which I find interesting that you're both saying that, because, and that's the biggest, I think, difference between the original and the remake, is that I don't think anyone's saying that the original is fun in any way.
Right?
No, the original was not fun.
And that's the biggest difference, and that's, I think, the thing that makes it feel most American. I do have a question for you, Kiko, because you've seen both, and so, like I was saying before, I think that the original ending really helps with connecting the themes there. And there's one thing that they share, which is like a line in the movie where one character asks the other, like, why are you doing this? And they give an answer that I won't spoil that line.
Yeah. It's in the trailer.
Is it really? Okay, so
seeing it
okay, so it says, why are you doing this? And it says, the response is, because you let me. And that moment, I think, comes at a different time in the original. And I think that, like, that is like a really strong connection of the sort of like theme, the central theme of what the original is, which is, again, like, there's a theme, there's a director or an interview with the director of the remake who calls it just like polite society, but again, like being pushed around and because you're too polite to, say no or push back or stand up for yourself. Yeah. And I feel like the thing about the change in the third act is that theme gets undercut in the remake, in my opinion. Do you agree with that or no?
I didn't even catch that theme in the remake of being polite. I was seeing so many other themes, mostly of the toxic masculinity, and especially because what something that the remake does that the original doesn't is they really bring in other ways of bringing in the tension, including the husband and wife having their own tension as well in their marriage. You don't see that at all in the original. Right. So there was a bunch of other tension things that were happening in the remake. So I didn't even really feel that. Like, I saw like one thing that kind of, after you told me about that, like when they're at the poolside and he asks, "Is this chair taken?" Like, it was taken kind of because their daughter was there, but he didn't really say anything about it. And so I could see little things like that, but I did not connect that at all in the remake at all.
Well, see, but I did because there's a couple of things where, like, so again, just sort of like the feeding her the meat, of course. There's the scene where like that babysitter shows up and like, she just they just both kind of give in to letting a stranger watch their kid that they've never met, and they're kind of forced out with it. There's that thing where like they give him the bill and he doesn't fight back at all, like when that bill is like given to him when they have the dinner and stuff.
It's like red flags.
Yeah, so
it's like movie was like red flag.
Yeah,
that's what the movie should have been called.
Yeah, red seriously. But I did pick up on it a lot, Cody, as far as like, well, because McAvoy would mention it often, as far as like when he was acting, incorrectly, and then he would always kind of circle back around to, well, this is because we, operate in this society where no one's honest, and let's be honest.
But and the thing
just didn't make any sense to me as far as like, why it didn't really bring any like. It didn't add anything to the story for me.
I mean, I recognize all those things, but I just didn't connect it with being too polite. When I saw every single one of those things that you mentioned, it just made me uncomfortable. So maybe I was looking at it from a different perspective, catching all those things that you just said, but not seeing it as a kind of a conversation about the politeness of society. Just for me, when it was happening, and maybe it's because I'm a parent, or maybe it's because I'm like that I don't like confrontation in real life. I would let the neighbor play his music all night long. I don't want to go over there and knock on the door and tell him to turn it down. So I saw it that way. I saw, oh man, it made my stomach hurt thinking about, him putting the kid on the Vespa and doing that, those kind of things. So but that's an interesting take. I really like that. And I did see it a little bit more in the remake when you mentioned that. So yeah, but for me, it was more about toxic masculinity, how those two characters were butting heads, the dads specifically, and then the mom taking over. So that's where I saw it from. But good catch, guys. That's a great that's a great look into it.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's go ahead and move on to final thoughts and grades. So for me, like I said before, in this, I think I would not fault anyone listening to this for taking this with a grain of salt, just because it is so hard not to compare the two. There's two movies, interestingly, one of the movies we're covering today also has a comparison point. That one is like a little less fair because it's like those are different things. But this is a remake of a movie that came out 2 years ago, same title, follows the same general story. So I think comparisons are fair here, especially when they deviate. And I think you can have an opinion about which one you prefer, which one does a better job. And for me, I do think that the original movie, kind of connects its themes a little bit better. I prefer the third act and kind of like how the third act punctuates the themes a little bit better. That being said, like I said, this is a very watchable studio horror movie. I think it's anchored by McAvoy, who it's in his top tier of performances. So if you like McAvoy as an actor, I think you'll really enjoy this performance. And I think I think it's more unsettling than it is like a true horror film. But I think it does effectively create tension and provide that those unsettling vibes, even if the end is a little bit kind of Hollywood-ish. So I give it a B-. Kiko, your thoughts and final grade?
Definitely. I was surprised. I didn't know what I was going into at all in this movie, and it just felt like one of those, let's just get this over with after the summer. This isn't really a summer movie. This is kind of like the August, September is the doldrums of the summer movies and doldrums, and then all the Oscar stuff, right? So that's what I was thinking when I went in there. And luckily, I did have a lot of fun watching it. I was very, very uncomfortable in the first two acts. Nothing crazy, bloody or anything violent happens in those first two acts, but just the way that people acted and reacted with one another really, really turned my stomach, I guess. And then when the third act comes along, of course, it's pretty shocking in both instances, the new one and the original. I was fine with both endings, just depending, like you said, what kind of ending you prefer, bleak or a little bit more, I guess, hopeful, if you want to call it that. But there's no way that the original ending would have worked with American audiences. I think it wouldn't be getting the same kind of play and the same kind of positive look at it if it did. So I think I like both of them, but I'm going to give a small bump with the remake, mostly because of McAvoy's performance. I think it was his best one of his career, on top of course something like Atonement, but totally different movies. So I'm going to go ahead and give this one a solid B.
Awesome. Jocelyn?
Talk about sad movies.
Yeah.
I'm gonna cry right now, but I think that I am actually, even talking it with you guys, I'm actually now even maybe a little mad that they didn't stick to the original. Like, how can you remake a movie and then change it completely, And I wish I would have I would have liked to have seen them try to do something so ballsy as the original and make it, there's ways that they could have tried to keep it more.
You can do bits of it, or
and it's all about the way that you do it, and that's why I'm actually really interested to see the original, because I know what happens, but I need to see how that happens. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's just a little bit like you can tell, like, if you see this new remake, what the original is. It's just the sad version of this movie, basically. So all that to say, I really didn't hate it, and I had a good time, so I'm gonna give it a B.
All right. So we will now move on to our next film, which is the 4:30 movie. So this movie was written and directed by Kevin Smith. So it is very interesting that Jerrod is not here today, because if you have listened at all to this podcast the last decade, we have spent so much time talking about Kevin Smith. Jerrod and I both, came across Kevin Smith at formative times in our lives, and was a big part of like establishing our taste in movies, and we both really, really liked him in kind of his earlier career. Kiko, never been a fan, and Jocelyn, I think you kind of like Kevin Smith early stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as any film fan,
Not any.
You're right, but I just think like as most film fans, as any film fans, you at least watch them. You know what I mean? You have to watch them. It's a part of like learning about movies.
It's a part about learning about independent cinema, for sure.
100%, exactly. As is Cassavetes' Cody, but whatever. We'll get into that later. But so yes, I did enjoy. It was never my thing. Maybe it was being.
I think it was kind of male skewing.
100%. It definitely is more like your dudes. But I didn't hate it for sure. The early stuff.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to kind of watch his career because, he made his career obviously starting and kicking it off with Clerks, which led to this kind of View Askew universe, which are kind of these characters who all live in the same universe. And that's covered by, Clerks, Mallrats, Chasing Amy, Dogma, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. And then Clerks 2, I would say, kind of fits in the good category of the good period of his career. And then Jersey Girl was kind of like in there as like a one-off kind of thing. And then, some stuff happens where, I actually don't mind Zack and Mary Make a Porno. I think that movie is pretty decent. But after that, it's Cop Out, and then like shit hits the fan for him where, he gets into like making like this religious movie that doesn't really work in Red State. He goes into a period of time where he is making, these movies. So on the podcast, we covered Tusk and Yoga Hosers, two horror movies, which are like borderline unwatchable, just like really terrible garbage. And then he had like some life stuff happen where he had a massive heart attack and kind of had a brush with death and kind of changed his life around. And since then, his stuff has been like really maudlin and I think, not as successful. So, going back to the Askew universe and doing movies like Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, which is kind of like a love letter to his daughter, Clerks 3, which is about his brush with death and that kind of thing. And now what we get is the 4:30 movie, which is like an ode to his childhood. So you can tell, and it's especially apparent in a sigh-inducing post-credit scene, that this is a semi-autobiographical movie for Kevin Smith. So basically, it takes place over the summer, where some teenagers. It starts with one character who kind of, I guess, is sort of supposed to be him. Kind of calls his crush and invites her to the movies. And she says yes, and so he goes to the movies and kind of theater hops with his friends, trying to get into rated R movies, and they're too young for him. And then like shenanigans ensue once they're at the movie theater, and it's very much sort of like an 80s movie pastiche kind of thing where like it's shot with like soft focus and it kind of like looks like an 80s type movie. It's very much like I think he's trying to do his version of like a John Hughes thing in this movie. I don't know how successful he is at that part of things. And it was interesting to watch because I think that the first scene of the movie, which is like the kid played by Austin Zazur, picks up the phone and calls his crush who's working at like a Chinese restaurant and invites her to the movies. And it's the best scene of the movie. The first scene is the best scene of the movie where you like get a sense of like, oh, Kevin Smith is kind of doing the thing again, because I think that his strong suit for better or worse has always been his writing. It's always been his best quality as a filmmaker. Even movies like I think his most like well-received movie aside from Clerks is probably Chasing Amy. And I think that movie has like, again, like well-written dialogue that I think is really interesting. And I think his dialogue is his best suit. In that movie, the dialogue is quick, it's clever, it's witty. It feels like Kevin Smith. And I'm like, is he back? Like, is this something like, is he good now again? And then we get introduced to the other characters, and then the movie starts to crumble. You get characters that are like a machismo. I assume that the other kid is supposed to be like a year older or something like that. I think that's how he's played. Maybe it just seems that way. But Nicholas
for a while,
Cirillo,
I thought it was his brother. I was like, is that his older brother?
Yeah.
The Bernie character.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so he meets his friend who is trying to like tell him that the girl that he has a crush on, her name is Melody Barnegat. You will not forget her name because they say it 5 million times in this movie, her full name, which is sometimes a Kevin Smith sort of crutch, I think. But you know, trying to convince him not to date her. You get to the theater, and then what you get from the theater forward, the movie just kind of like meanders. And it's really hard for a movie where the credits roll at like an hour and 10 minutes to meander, but it manages to do that where, you know, it starts to be like a cavalcade of cameos, some of which are successful. I thought Justin Long was pretty funny in his cameo. I enjoyed that. You also get Ken Jeong, who ruins everything that he's in. And so, you know, that I did not enjoy. And from that point forward, it's just about sort of like the perils of, you know, trying to sneak through this movie theater and going into the movies. And, you know, there's just so much annoying stuff about it where, like, you know, you get derailed for a solid, like, 5 or 6 minutes showing these fake trailers that were, of course, designed to get as many cameos in as possible. And I don't think that any of those fake trailers are any good. You get this sort of like storyline with his overbearing parents, like his mom calling the theater. Again, that feels like a derailment. That feels like just like a distraction from the main narrative.
Just enjoy the ride, Cody. God,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be.
Well, that's the thing. It's like
a purpose. That's the movie. It's just like
okay,
enjoy the ride.
That's fine. You can have like a hangout movie, but this is not Richard Linklater. Like this is
it's definitely not. It's Kevin Smith. Like
yeah. So you get this thing where I don't get that the themes. There's any kind of themes here aside from like Kevin Smith reminiscing about either some people he knew or some experiences that he had growing up at the movie. So you can call it a love letter to growing up at the theater, whatever. It doesn't have anything to say, I don't think, about that experience. And I think that the humor, I think, again, misses the boat. There's multiple instances of one thing I really hate in a movie, which is like that sort of like joke that you make that is like you have hindsight and you make a joke about that. So a character going like, people will never watch movies that have a comic book character or Batman. No one will ever watch a Batman movie. Or when there's like an end credit scene, no one's going to stay to the end. Like, ugh, that is the lowest hanging fruit that you can possibly do. It's such lazy writing for me. And there's multiple instances of that. And I know that I'm aggressively, you know, not happy about this experience. It's Kevin Smith's like least offensive movie in a while. It's not offensive. It's not bad. It's not terrible. It's not unwatchable, but it is not good. And I feel like there's just and you know what? I think the thing that makes it that way a little bit is that it is sincere and it's sweet. And I think that, you know, that sincere sweetness has sort of teetered into like really saccharine, cheesy stuff in kind of his other, like, you know, especially I think with Clerks 3, but to some degree, the Jay and Silent Bob reboot movie. But this one feels like it's kind of like appropriately layered. So, you know, I appreciate that we're not getting like the rehashed references and jokes that we get in like those last two movies where it's not him, you know, trying to squeeze every bit of like juice out of his previous work. This feels like an individual movie that is its own kind of thing. That said, I don't really think it's super successful, and it just meanders, and I think it's kind of boring. And I was not super into it. But Jocelyn, what were your thoughts on the 4:30 movie?
Oh wow, I'm next. You know, I did not hate it. I was really, maybe it's because my expectations were really low going into it, but I messaged you and I was like, is it okay that I'm not hating this movie? Like, I'm really liking it. Actually, up until like the entire, like the movie theater, the entire movie theater portion of the movie, I thoroughly enjoyed. I loved the cameos. Like the Justin Long one was hysterical. I mean, maybe not hysterical, but pretty funny. I messaged you when Rachel Dratch made an appearance and Jason Lee as his dad. I was just eating it all up. I loved it. I was like really enjoying myself. And I know, yeah, it is a little cheesy to be like, oh my God, they would never do a TV show about random Star Wars characters. But that was cracking me up. I was like, oh, so, I mean, I know it's low hanging fruit, like you said, but there was something about the pace that I was really enjoying as far as like the immaturity of them and their, just trying to get laid type of like, young kid type movie, like the 80s sort of influences, with sort of these cameos of people making those like, oh, if you only knew in the future, that's exactly what's going to happen kind of humor. I was all along for the ride. And honestly, again, not like the best movie I've ever seen, but I wasn't kicking, I wasn't ready to turn it off. And then honestly, for me, it was the second, I don't even know when it started, but after the theater, he started doing these like insanely long dialogue scenes back to back. And that's where I was just like, now this movie sucks. Like, I want to go back to that other movie I was watching that was really fun and dumb. And now all of a sudden we're just getting these like walking scenes with like them talking, these two characters. And it was like really difficult to continue to stay interested after that. And that was the rest of the movie. So I was just like, dang it, man, you had me for a little while and now you lost me.
I think it's the thing of like Kevin Smith being in love with his own writing sometimes.
For sure. But if they had even taken a few of those scenes and sprinkled them in between and they had paced it out a little better, I think it would have done a lot better of a job as far as like the pacing goes, because it could have like picked me back in with, oh, another funny, like, running around the theater type thing. Mm. But instead it was just like theater heavy. Then it was like real long schmoozy heavy. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's because it's sincere that it's really good. It is so sincere, and it's really.
I didn't say that's why it was really good.
No,
I said
sorry,
it was sincere.
But that's why it's maybe like slightly successful, is that it's like very sincere, and it really is, and it's lovely. I'm gonna say it's like Kevin Smith's Spielberg movie. It's like him, like, going back and reminiscing about his childhood, and that type of stuff is just enjoyable. It was nice. So yeah. I didn't hate it. I'm so shocked. I really expected to hate it. So
yeah, Kiko, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll make this short. I'll preface this by saying that I thought Kevin Smith's Chasing Amy, when I saw it at 17 years old, was a freaking masterpiece. And then I got older and I revisited it maybe like 2 years later, and I was like, this is just phony baloney stuff. It didn't connect with me whatsoever anymore. And from then on, I went back. I had to go back and see Clerks and Mallrats because I hadn't seen them before Chasing Amy, and I didn't buy into the groundbreaking aspect of Clerks, even though it probably is. Just didn't do it for me. And then moving forward, of course, nothing. Maybe Zack and Miri, like you brought up, was fine, but nothing that he's made since then has made me believe that he could get back on any kind of track that anybody that liked him before thought that he could. But I'm going to agree with you and agree with Jocelyn that this is a sweet movie, and it's very it felt like an 80s movie, like you said. So there's a lot of like nostalgia feelings, even though they don't like reference anything besides Star Wars and things like that. So it felt really like heartfelt from him. But beside that, I didn't find it too funny. The best thing about this movie, I thought, was the main actor who's playing a version of Kevin Smith. He reminded me a lot of Austin Zajur, and he reminded me a lot of like a Cooper Hoffman from Licorice Pizza type of character. Just almost like he's the non-actor type actor. He just felt very, very natural in everything that he did. But I felt like I just wish that there was a better script other than the meandering parts of it. The love story was sweet between him and Sienna, Melody Bart. How do you pronounce that last name?
Melody
Barnegat, that's right. So I think that hardcore Kevin Smith apologists will say that this is a going back to his kind of roots again. I can see that. I can see where they're coming from. At least he's not doing another Red State or Cop Out. But it's kind of the tired and tired form of what I've seen before with him, where there's not a lot of there's not a lot of content in the words that he's putting out. I, I I wish that some of the cameos hit a little bit harder for me. I liked what's her name? I liked Saturday Night Live woman,
Rachel Dratch.
Rachel Dratch's character.
So funny.
I think she's just a great comedian. So yeah, I think that was pretty funny. And I don't even know if the character was funny. I just like seeing Rachel Dratch in movies. She should be in everything. So so overall, yeah, I think that sweet movie. It's not a ringing endorsement, but anything that is not as annoying as what Kevin Smith has done before, it sounds like really bad. But I guess that would be a ringing endorsement from somebody like me who doesn't like him. But yeah, it annoyed me the least out of anything that I've seen coming from him in a very long time. But that's not saying that I would recommend it to anybody. So
yeah, well, let's jump into final thoughts and grades. So for me, again, and I've said this a bunch on this podcast, but for me, like the worst offense that a movie can have is that it's boring. And I think that for a quick breezy, I think the movie like literally clocks in at like 76 minutes or something like that. It's or at least that's when like the credits roll. And for me, it's just like it's just kind of boring. I think once it gets to the theater, nothing really happens of interest. It kind of lays into its sort of like established sense of humor. And then it kind of ends in, with just like a pound full of sugar in terms of like, the sort of like what it's trying to do, like with its characters. And so, for me, like I said, I'm glad to see that he's not kind of like going into this esque universe and kind of like playing the hits and having these tired references to older stuff. I would like him to do more original stuff. I just don't want it to be this sort of like, you've got to be in on the joke kind of movies like Red State and Yoga Hosers, where like if you're not like, it's like a very insular thing where you're either like part of the joke or you're watching it going, why are you wasting my time with this? And to me, I don't feel like that's present here. It is sweet. It does feature like a great opening scene, which I think is the best scene that Kevin Smith has written in years. I think it's really great and a sign of what he is, capable of. And I would love to see him string. Nothing would make me happier than to see Kevin Smith regain his fastball, right? I mean, I think I really like him. Like, if you watch his Q&As, I am literally in the front row on a Q&A special, and if it's called Kevin Smith Burn in Hell, you can see they cut the camera to me in that special. So I've been a big fan. I've seen him do Q&As like 2 or 3 times. I was at the premiere of Zack and Miri in Austin, anyway, all that to say, not his worst movie by any stretch, but not a good movie. I give it a C. Jocelyn, your final thoughts and grade.
I think Kiko hit it on the head where he said that it was the least annoying of his latest, but would not recommend. Totally agree. So I actually chose C as well. So,
Kiko.
I think that again, it was sweet. It was endearing for a Kevin Smith movie. But yeah, I just I'd love to see him do something completely different. People say that a lot about directors that Wes Anderson. People want Wes Anderson to do a horror movie, right? See what that's all about. So I like to see Kevin Smith like break out of his box and do something different, but I just don't see it in the cards for him. So yeah, I think that 4:30 movie. Kevin Smith is about 10 years older than me, so he was hanging out at the movie theater in the 80s. I was hanging out at the movie theater in the 90s. So maybe it's just because I didn't get into wacky adventures like him that I'm a little bit jealous. But I'm giving this movie a C as well.
Oh, okay. Across the board, C's. Nice. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to our final movie of the day, which is Winner. So Winner is a film directed by Susanna Fogel, who also worked with the main actress here, Emilia Jones, on a movie from I think it was last year, if I'm not mistaken, called I think it was called Cat Person. Yes, Cat Person. A movie I don't know if either of you saw. I saw it at Sundance the year that it came out. It was based on a New Yorker article. I think New Yorker article that was about like dating and like creepy guys on the internet. And this is another one, interestingly, I kind of alluded to this earlier, where, Speak No Evil, we were talking about, is a remake. Winner is the second movie in just a couple of years, I think. I think Reality came out last year, if I'm not mistaken, that is covering the sort of true life story of Reality Winner, who was... who went to jail for leaking documents about Russian interference in the election. She was an NSA contractor who ended up leaking documents to The Intercept and went to jail for a number of years. And this is the second movie doing that. So last year's movie was a HBO Max or a Max original starring Sydney Sweeney. And I think, we can make comparisons to that one, but they are different things. I think most notably, Reality, the Sydney Sweeney one, is kind of, it's sort. I guess we can call it like gimmicky, but it's a movie that is derived entirely. The script is all from the transcripts of when she was visited in her home, I guess by the FBI. And so you get like the transcripts, the ums and ahs. It's very like to the T. And it just is the entire movie takes place during that interaction. Whereas Winner shows Reality Winner's journey from a teenager until ultimately, leaking the documents and the aftermath of that. So it is kind of like a longer time frame. Definitely different tones. I would say that Winner is takes a little bit of a lighter, more comedic tone as part of it, whereas Reality is very serious, intense, kind of like a powder keg kind of movie. This is a little bit more of, there's a little bit more humor in there. I think that both of the movies feature really good performances. Amelia Jones I find to be such an interesting actress. So she was in Best Picture winner Coda from a couple of years ago. She was in, I think you could tell immediately in that movie that she had like big time star potential. And I think that this is another like nuanced performance from her where she plays a wide range of emotions really well. And I think she's, sort of, continuing to get better and better. You also get some small performances in the supporting roles from Zach Galifianakis, who plays her father. That has kind of like issues with kind of painkillers and stuff like that. And then Connie Britton, Coach Taylor's wife, who plays her mother. And yeah, so I would say, as far as we're talking about with Winner, I kind of have some issues a little bit with like, is this an interesting enough story to be told? And I think that because I think that like there's some like the first like couple of acts of the movie establishing this Reality Winner as a person and a character, there's not a lot of super interesting stuff that goes on. It's just kind of like her life and her family strife, her relationship issues, and then her like the biggest theme of the movie is sort of like her conscience weighing on her as she is essentially spying, or not spying, but like listening in on on live feeds to sort of like survey and monitor and in real time translate messages that are going out to try to find threats to the country as part of the Air Force. And because that's what she was. She was like a translator and knew some languages. And I think that sort of moral questioning is something that is maybe like the most interesting point of tension of the movie. However, I don't really know that any of that leads to her decision to leak the information, which feels like a separate kind of thing. And there's an interesting, I don't know if either of you picked up on this, but I also think that the movie kind of undercuts its subject a little bit, where there's a couple of things I can think of. One of which is when she makes there's a voiceover in it, and she makes a comment of like, they wouldn't have even been interested in me or what I did if I didn't have a weird name. And then also there's a piece where she mentions that she doesn't want to be like snowed in and be like a proper whistleblower. So it undercuts the interesting part of her character, which is like, instead of this being like an interesting person, it's like a regular normal person who did an interesting thing. And I don't know that like that makes the story that leads up to it all that compelling. I also think it leaves a lot on the table, which is like, if you're telling this well-rounded story, like there's another part of this where like there were implications that like the Intercept sold her out and didn't protect her as a source, and that's how they kind of found her as the leaker. None of that is really brought up or mentioned in the movie. I think that like the part which is again the most interesting, which is her leaking and sort of the fallout of that, is super condensed. It's the shortest part of the movie, where, you know, from leak until end, it's what, like 15-20 minutes maybe, if that, of an hour and 45-minute movie. And that's the most interesting part of the story. And I think when it goes into that decision that she made to do that, it's almost like an impulsive thing. I don't think it gets into why she's doing it or like what's going into it. There's like some themes here that are unexplored. Like clearly they're trying to bring across like that she had some element of like OCD that plays into this, but none of it is really talked about. It's just kind of present in the voiceover stuff. So I just don't think that the story is really all that compelling, because I think the compelling piece is the leak, and I think that's covered in reality, and I could see why maybe they wouldn't want to focus on that because there's a whole other movie about it. I don't know the development timelines on that and if they were simultaneously done or if they were aware of it. You know, that being said, I think the movie is like, you know, breezy. I think that you know, it's lighter than I would have anticipated. I think the performances are good across the board. I do think that it's play up of like the morals of what she's doing. You know, she got into like, she initially wants to use her languages to kind of help people, and she ends up, you know, kind of like spying on people and having things directly lead to like loss of life. And I think that internal struggle is interesting from a character standpoint. I just don't know that the movie ever does too much with it. So, you know, that being said, I don't think it's a bad movie by any stretch. I just wish there was some more meat on the bone. Kiko, what did you think of Winner?
Yeah, I'll agree with you about the you know, the strife that she's feeling inside of her. I would have liked that to have come out a little bit more, but like you said, I think this was a lot lighter. As I was watching, I was like, oh wow, this feels like more like a really comedy drama type film. So I don't think that this is the type of movie that would have kind of delved too deep into that. But there's a part at the end of the movie where she kind of brings up the fact like nobody remembers who she is. And I have to admit myself, I mean, even being a news hound that reads way too much news on a daily basis, her story was very unfamiliar to me completely. I mean, and when you think of people like Edward Snowden or those types of people, I knew all about him. When Reality Winner came up, she kind of just came and went. And now these movies come up, and so I'm reading about her, or I'm watching this movie, and, you know, Googling as I'm watching and seeing where she's at and things like that. I'm just like, wow, I didn't know about her. And whenever I go into a biopic like this, I just want to, as a viewer myself, I want to know something that I didn't know before. Maybe if I had already known something about the story. In this aspect, I knew nothing about this story really, other than the fact that she had leaked something and then she went to jail. Right. So getting a chance to see like her life at the beginning, and they kind of referenced that, you know, 9/11 was kind of the start of like her starting to think about doing something completely different out of the norm that her family wanted her to do. And also that, you know, maybe she wanted to do as like this kind of free spirit, because she really comes off as a very different person at the beginning of the movie than she is at the end of it. So I really enjoyed watching that journey that she took. And again, I always find it interesting when it comes to these biopics, especially these politically kind of charged ones, the type of tone that it takes. Like, oh, why did they make Snowden with Joseph Gordon-Levitt such a thriller, and then this one's kind of funny, and it's just a weird way of like, you know, presenting the story. I thought that this was fine. I like the way that they did it. It wasn't too heavy. It was a little bit funny, but I even to kind of bump heads with you on the reality one, the story called, or the movie called Reality. I thought that was a little funny as well, only because of the cadence of the way they speak.
Yeah,
it was so on point with the real that those parts were it's just so awkward, and these awkward silences and the FBI agent saying something just a throwaway line just to kind of fill in space. And I thought some of that was funny. I really, the reality movie, not to harp too much on it, it felt like one episode of a 10 episode series type thing,
Sure.
Which was good. I really liked the way that they did it. With this one, it played out more like a traditional biopic, of course, from beginning to the end. And I didn't have a problem with it whatsoever. I think that Emily Clark, I love Coda. It was my favorite movie that year. I think she did a fabulous job as reality winner. And I thoroughly enjoyed her performance. And like you said, I think that it's all going to come down for people and how interesting the story is in general. Because really, what did she do? She leaked a very important document that shouldn't have been leaked. We could talk about the pros and cons of that in a different podcast, I guess. But in terms of the performance and the film itself, I really enjoyed watching something that I didn't know about before, and learning something about this woman who, stood her ground and thought she was doing something for the benefit of the country, no matter, if you agree with her or not. So.
Yeah. Jocelyn, your thoughts?
Well, you made it clear what you thought because you said documents that shouldn't be leaked. So there
Ooh,
you go. You gave
did.
your hand away.
Yep.
No, but I don't know. Y'all may be able to correct me, but I feel like this is the type of movie that really started with Thank You for Smoking, where that type of that's really, I think, the first movie that started this sort of similar style where it's like the jokiness with the editing, like the voiceover, like sort of unreliable narration, that kind of a thing. It's very similar to that for me, which I think it's great. I enjoyed all that. I think the performances are excellent. The Coda girl, Amelia Jones, is incredible. I really, really love her, and I'm just going to watch whatever she does in the future because she's just such a naturally, very calm actor. It's just so natural for her. It's incredible. And I really also liked Galifianakis in this. There was no sense of humor for him, and I just have never seen him play such a serious role, and it was really interesting to watch for me. And I really liked their relationship, her and her dad, and watching that all play out. And it's funny that you said it was a biopic because it really is. But so at the end, I'm like, okay, so it's just a biopic. Great, that's fine. But what y'all were saying about, there's pros and cons to what she did. And I feel like it was presented in a way that was just so one-sided, very much from her perspective, since it is a biopic. And I really wish there had been some pushback as far as I don't know if it's for tension, but just to provide more context to there are other sides of this. It's not just her doing this thing for her country. And I know that she thought that that's what she was doing, a positive thing. But I wish there had been more context to that as far as do you know what I mean? What I'm trying to say, Cody?
Well, it almost plays into an impulsive decision that she's making where
Right.
she's which, by the way, I don't even know if how that panned out, but how can you think that that's not going to get back to you?
Yeah, well, you brought that up. I think probably they found out, not through the intercept, but they just probably saw somebody that they could see who printed certain documents.
It was printing, and I remember I said that during it. I can't remember if it was her or Snowden, or I remember that the printer was the reason. So it must have been her.
Right,
It
right.
Was in this,
yeah, they
movie.
probably had. Yeah,
Well,
they probably had to put a code in or something. I don't know what it. Even at the lowest rung of a company, sometimes you have to do certain things, and you're charted on some kind of.
Much less the NSA, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just think it was a little silly to just be a straight biopic. It didn't really. I feel like the not severity, but the weight of the circumstances required more to it than that. But
all I know is that if I was watching Jesse Waters every day, I would snap too. So.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to final thoughts and grades. So for me, I would say that, again, I'm just going to reiterate the point I said before, which is I think that rather than being a compelling sort of like childhood to thing story that is an interesting character or person who lived an entire interesting life up until this point. It's about, again, a relatively normal situation where a person does kind of like a significant thing. And, a lot of their life, and like notoriety is defined by this thing that they did. And like, I don't know that it ever justifies giving us the context of what she was like as a teenager, or whatever. I think that, that's where I appreciate reality, where it's like this snapshot, sort of like, powder keg, like I said, movie that happens on this one day in this one span of time. This one, I just didn't find the story or what was going on super compelling. There's compelling moments of it, certainly, but again, it spends the least amount of time on the most interesting aspect of the story. So for me, I give it a C+. I don't think that it's bad, but I'm not going to recommend it. Kiko, your final thoughts and grade.
Yeah, I agree with you with the compelling moments. There are few and far between, but the ones that hit well for me. I think Emilia Clarke did an amazing job as Jones. The character, and some of the the facial expressions. She goes through a wide range of expressions, but I think it's all going to come down to, like we said before, whether you find this story interesting or not. A lot of people apparently didn't, because it didn't make the news, or maybe had the 24-hour news cycle. This is going to get flushed out with everything else after a week or two. So I think that's just the way that things work right now in the media landscape. So if you missed her story like I did the first time around, and you're able to catch this and you find some kind of whether you agree with her or not and what she did, you can find some kind of a feeling of being on her side or not, and kind of work your way from there as a viewer of what she's doing. But I think she did a great job in the film, and I think that doing it as a traditional biopic from 9 years old to where she ended up was a good decision in this part. I didn't mind the lightheartedness of it all, but I would also recommend going back and watching the other one that came out last year as well. It would be I don't know how fun of a Friday night that would be, but a double feature of reality and Winner.
Or just pause Winner when the FBI
right?
shows up, and then put on reality.
Exactly. There you go. Finish it off, right? So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and recommend this film. I'm giving it a B-.
Jocelyn?
I think to quote Cody, I'm gonna say it was fine. Like, it's fine. That's how I felt about it. It was like, there's parts that are good. It's just like, it's a fine movie. So I'm gonna give it a B- as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, that is going to do it for this week. So we are taking next week off, but when we come back the following week, we're going to be covering basically whatever we end up seeing over the next couple of weeks that's coming out. So like next week, we'll cover, or next week, what's coming out is Transformers 1, which Kiko and I have seen. So, and Jerrod actually might be back for that one, because I don't think he can resist. But The Substance, a horror movie, comes out. And then on the 27th, we get Megalopolis, the Francis Ford Coppola movie that is going to be super interesting. We also have some home releases that come out. We have Wolves that comes out in 2 weeks, the Brad Pitt and George Clooney movie that's coming out on Apple TV+. We have Will and Harper, the documentary with Will Ferrell that comes out on Netflix. So we will be covering some combination of those films in a couple of weeks. So and then I'll also be giving my recap on Fantastic Fest as well. So if you'd like to follow the podcast, look up CineSnob on Facebook and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcasts. And if you're new to the show, if you're a member of Kiko's fan club and are rejoining because he's back, please give us a 5-star rating, and it goes a long way in helping us out. So leave that 5-star rating on Apple Podcast if you can. And anything else, guys?
Are we going to be reviewing Whiplash again, since they're going to be reviewing?
Oh, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
They're releasing it.
Oh, maybe. I wouldn't mind talking. I've watched that movie a lot since it came out.
Yeah, me too.
Holds up.
It does, very much.
Yeah. All right. So that'll do it for this week. So thanks for listening to the CineSnob Podcast, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to the CineSnob Podcast. To read reviews, interviews, and more, visit cinesnob.net. See you next week.